Hey, Brian, what is up?
We got it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm actually glad this turned out really quickly. Usually it takes like 5 minutes of going back and forth to figure out a way to connect and stuff like that. So I was giving people like a quick introduction behind your background and the fact that I haven't seen you for like probably like, I think it's been like 12 years at this point. Although it
Yeah, can
feels
you
like,
believe it?
yeah, although it feels like it's honestly been just a few weeks, but I guess that's always kind of how time always flies. So I was giving them a background of, I forgot honestly exactly how much weight you lost. I think it was like 20, 25 pounds or so. And they obviously saw your before and after pictures. And I'm just honestly happy to see you. I haven't freaking seen you in forever.
I
You
know, I'm glad
invite,
we've kept in touch all this time, but
yeah,
I don't think I physically have seen you in 12 years,
yeah.
which is crazy. And
So
that
I,
time I went to Vancouver, I went to New York, now I'm in New Jersey, so it's been a lot has happened since then for sure.
yeah, I kind of lost touch. Every time I reach out to you, it's like once every few months or so. You're like basically either living in a different country or like a different state or something like that. I'm like, okay, I'll
Different
just presume,
job. Yeah.
yeah, I'll presume he's doing well. So, Brian, I'm going to let you take over and kind of tell your story because I think it is a really good story about your fitness journey. In the beginning, we'll even start way back when of how you even ended up gaining about like 20, 25 pounds of excess body fat because it's kind of like you don't see it, on a day-to-day basis. And then one day you wake up and you're like, well, shit, I'm like 25, 30 pounds overweight. I don't know what the hell happened. But
Yeah.
more importantly, just things that have worked for you to actually be able to sustain that weight loss, although you still have like a very active and busy schedule. And you're also like very social. You're definitely not living like a super Spartan, like kind of Amish style lifestyle like me, which isn't required, to be to optimize your health. And you're a perfect example of how, you could live in a very busy city or like society and still make your um, career dreams come true while not losing yourself mentally and physically, which honestly the majority of people do. And more importantly, what I'd like to kind of get some secrets out of you on the chat today is, um, as you know, 90 plus percent of people that end up losing weight end up regaining it within 3 to 4 years, if not like an extra 5 pounds just for the hell of it, five extra pounds just for the hell of it. And then they have these cyclical patterns their whole life. They lose the weight, they gain the weight, they lose the weight, they gain the weight. And that's just with the
Yeah.
people that actually manage to lose the weight. And a large percentage of people never lose the weight. They just
I'm
gradually,
actually I'm actually fitter than when I left your hands.
yeah,
So I'm actually uh in better shape at 50 than I was at 38 when you got me into already really good shape. So yeah, it's been definitely a great journey that obviously you started me on for sure.
well, let's start way back when. Let's start when you're, relatively
Yeah,
good weight and what kind of events happen to make you gain about 20, 25, or 30 pounds of excess body fat, and we'll go from there.
sure. So I actually grew up with problems, having problems with my weight. Like many people, I was overweight as a child, struggled, all throughout my childhood up all the way through high school with being overweight. Um, a lot of it was, I think, some issues I was having mentally, dealing with a lot of change in my life and struggling with some issues at school, and it sort of manifested itself in being overweight. Um, so I actually was, all the way through high school was really on the heavy side. I think probably at my heaviest I maybe was 170, and I'm only 5'6", so 170 pounds on someone who's 5'6" really is a lot to carry around. But then when I went into college, I found a better community of people that I was able to sort of feel supported by. I was walking a lot more in college. I went to Madison, Wisconsin, and this huge campus. So I was walking all the time. I started eating healthier. I started working out more, and ended up losing quite a bit of weight, and was quite a big pendulum. I think I went from 170 down to like 120 I lost like 50 pounds in the span of like 6 months. It was is a pretty um, massive transformation. But then inevitably, like a lot of people, over the next, many years, my weight would just creep back up again, and then I would, spring into action and see what I could do to get it down. And I tried all those different diets. I think when I was living in Hong Kong, I discovered the Atkins diet and started doing Atkins. And then I was, anything that I thought would help me to, um, lose the weight. I tried anything and everything. Before I started seeing you, I was living in Hawaii. I was a store director there for Louis Vuitton. I was eating all the really delicious Hawaiian food, which is amazing. Not necessarily the healthiest food, but
Hmm.
like the the plate, the barbecue plate with the barbecue chicken and the mac salad and the 2 scoops of rice covered in gravy. I mean, it's delicious food, but it's really really unhealthy for you. And I was just also I was in a long distance relationship, and it was a really toxic relationship. And when I left Hawaii and I moved to California, I think I was again at like my heaviest point. Um, I broke up with my partner. Actually, my partner broke up with me, and I was just in a really bad state mentally, emotionally. I was going through some pretty major life changes, not only losing a partner, but changing jobs. I was in a really awful, awful situation with work, and just feeling really, really negatively about everything. Um, so it's no surprise that that manifested itself in how I looked as well. I wasn't really taking care of myself. I wasn't taking care of my body. I wasn't taking care of my mind. Um, so that's when I found you. I think I did a Google search, and I was like trainer, Orange County. I was living in Newport Beach at the time, and I needed to, I think, set myself back on the right track. Um, and I think I mean, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about how I've maintained all these years, but I think the biggest thing for me was that you taught me uh, life changes that I think have stuck with me through the entire time. I'll give you an example. Like, um, I've been going through all of these low carb diets where I would, eat low carb for a while to lose some weight, and then I would go back and I would eat my normal diet again of lots of white rice and bread and everything else, and then I would just gain weight back again. And I think when I started seeing you was the first time that, from a diet perspective, I made some permanent changes in my diet. So I switched out white rice for brown rice. I don't eat white rice anymore. I only eat brown rice. I switched out bread for like whole wheat wraps. I ate a lot more vegetables. I ate a lot more whole grains, proteins. And all of those changes, I think, have stuck with me my entire life. To this day, the last 12 years, I just don't eat really like sandwiches anymore. I'll eat wraps. I don't eat, lots of heavy, starchy foods like pasta. And not saying that people can't do that, but for me, I found that it worked better for me when I didn't have all of those really starchy, heavy foods to sort of weigh me down. Um, the second thing that really has stuck with me all this time are um, the activities that I think I incorporated into my daily life that were above and beyond just the working out aspect. So obviously, I saw you. I think I was seeing you a couple of times a week, working out. Learned a lot of different strength training exercises. But on top of that, I biked to the gym. Do you remember that? I used to
Hmm.
bike there, and then I would bike after the session back home again, and just incorporating that little extra bit of activity into my routine Well, to this day, I do that now. So, for example, I have a dog. You could probably see her on the
Yeah, it's
couch.
running around and back over there.
Yeah. Uh, I actually inherited this dog from my dad a few years ago after he passed. I took her up to New York and brought her here. But having that activity every day, I do walk in the morning with her, 30 minutes to 45 minutes in the morning, and another walk at night. I'm literally doing that activity every single day, twice a day, and that's on top of the 3 times a week that I work out with strength training. I don't do any cardio anymore. I used to bust my butt on the bicycle and on the stairmaster and on the elliptical and all of these cardio machines all the time to try to have some activity. And what I realized is I didn't need to do any of that. I just needed to incorporate a few constant changes in my life, which was like walking my dog twice a day and getting that activity in, and then partner that with the strength training that I do 3 times a week. And for me, that's been enough. Um, I will say, probably about 2 years ago, this is after COVID hit. I was looking to get into even better shape. So I've with all of those changes, I've sort of been able to maintain pretty well. And I was hovering around, I would say 132, 133, something like that, in terms of weight. Um, but I still wasn't necessarily happy with the way I looked. I always had this like stubborn little pooch, and the my belly, and I wanted to see like abs. Like I've never really had abs in my life. I mean, I've had like the suggestion of abs, like, but not really
Hmm.
like actual abs my entire life. I mean, there's always this person in my head that pops out from when I was a child, that it's like this fat person that was like that's still with you all the time, that sort of like talks to you, like you never let that go. And that person was like telling me I could never have abs. That just wasn't, it wasn't in my nature. I wasn't built that way genetically. There's no way I could have abs because I've just never really thought that that was possible for me. So about 2 years ago, I'm like, everything's been going really well. I'm in a good sort of routine. I'm staying, healthy and fit, but I wanted to like just kick it up another level. I wanted to kick it up another notch. So there's actually two changes I made about 2 years ago that made a huge difference in my overall physical appearance, and then uh, my weight, my fitness level, um, and both of them are related to nutrition and to eating. I continue to work out, weight train and all of that, but I made two changes in my sort of eating habits. The first was, and I know this might be a little bit, controversial, but I started doing intermittent fasting. And all it was, I mean, there wasn't anything really drastic or major that I did. I just didn't eat before noon and I didn't eat after 8 o'clock. So I ended up having 2 meals a day. I would get, coffee in the morning, but I would have my first meal at noon. I would have snacks in the afternoon, protein bars, almonds, whatever. And then I would try to make my last meal no later than 8 o'clock at night. That was the first major change that I made. And the second major change was I started doing a meal plan. I know there's a lot out there. I happen to use one called Factor, which I really like, because I found that what was my problem was, even if I was eating healthy, I wasn't controlling the portions of what I was eating. So I would just keep eating and eating and eating and eating. And no matter how healthy you eat, if you just eat a lot, you're still not gonna you see the changes that you want, right? So I felt, for me, especially with my busy lifestyle, I'm a VP of guest experience, and I obviously, have a lot of responsibility and a pretty hectic schedule. This was an easy way for me to control a little bit better what was going into my body, because I chose the keto plan, lots of protein, good fats, lots of vegetables, and that for me helped to control the portions. And I wasn't, like when you live in New York City, it's so easy to eat, to order out all the time. I was like, before, and even during COVID, the beginning of COVID, I was ordering food delivery like I don't know how many times a week. It was like crazy. I was ordering all this food delivered to me because all the restaurants were, obviously closed. And I started to rely on that food delivery. And, you can't get really healthy, balanced meals ordering out of restaurants every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I started doing that meal plan when things started opening up again, and I started going back to work after being at home for 6 months during the pandemic. And that was really a huge change for me because all of a sudden I wasn't eating out all the time. I wasn't ordering in food. I had a healthy meal that I would take with me to work and eat for lunch every day at work. Saved a lot of time, saved a lot of money. And I still go out and eat and I still indulge, when I want to, but those two changes, the intermittent fasting and the meal plan has really made a significant difference. And so now I'm down to I sort of do about 123 to 125 pounds. So I lost like around 10 pounds off of my frame, which was already, I was in pretty good shape, but just that losing those 10 pounds from those two changes, all of a sudden I started to see like everything tighten up,
Mutations occur.
and
You
yeah,
know?
it was great. I was like, oh, things are not sagging anymore. Like I
Yeah.
could actually see my abs started to get really cut, and everything started to look really, really good. And obviously, that encouraged me even more when
Hmm.
I saw those changes. And so I've stuck with that. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to be sustainable for me to continuing, eating factory meals 8 to 10 times a week. I love them. I think they're delicious, but I think that has instilled in me the idea, at least, that if I ever do stop eating these ready-made meals, that the portions of what I'm eating and pre-portioning the food. Maybe I know there's a lot of people that like make their food for the week and they put them in pre-portioned like containers and eat it that way. I think that is really a fantastic way to control your nutrition and your eating, and make it easier for you to stay on the right path for sure. Sorry, that
Yeah.
was a really
No, no.
long speech to bring us up to today.
You got a lot of actually, I took some notes here and you brought up a lot of actually really important notes. Let's just kind of, I want to get your opinion on a few of those and dive a little bit deeper into these important subjects.
Sure.
Um, so like you mentioned, a lot of people do have a misperception like excessive body fat is just like an aesthetic issue, like, oh, don't even worry about it. If it doesn't look good, who cares? It's what's on the inside that counts. But you brought up a very good point in the sense that it's a symptom of like various issues going on in a person's life that manifest themselves visually and physically in excess body fat. And you kind of actually hinted at them. And the three issues that are very most common with people that suffer from excess body fat issues are they most always have a love-hate relationship in their life. So you mentioned the poor relationship. They most always have some kind of story gap, in particular in their work environment. So they want their work environment to be a certain way, but it's a completely different way that's not representative of their character, but yet they have to change their character to mold into the work demands, et cetera, et cetera. And the third one that's very, very common is always just a feeling of emptiness in a person's life. And obviously, they can kind of fill these gaps through a wide variety of areas. Some people go to the extremes of drug abuse, for example, even abusing medical drugs as well, which could easily be abused. But a lot of people go towards using food because food provides them the control they feel they don't have in those variables. And also that unconditional love, which inevitably everyone is looking for. They just want to be accepted for who they are and feel safe of representing who they are in the real world, which oftentimes, unfortunately, the real world makes that hard to do, especially like
Yeah.
in a monetary environment or when you're working for a big company in particular. You always have to kind of manage different personalities in that company, different structures, bureaucracy, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like one of the reasons you've been successful is probably because you really focused on just nailing those variables down, which inevitably set up a solid foundation for which you can build off of. Because oftentimes I feel the biggest mistake people make is when they have any health issue or excess body fat, is they're like, well, I just have to like work out more and eat better. I can stay in this shitty relationship. I can stay in this overwhelming and shitty job I don't like, you know what I mean? And it all be fine. But then that's why you have a 90% reoccurrence of people losing weight and gaining weight, or getting rid of one health issue just for another health issue to pop up. And they're basically just kind of chasing symptoms their whole entire life. So can you kind of
Yeah.
dive more into the detail of how important that is and how that really help you set that foundation for success long term?
Yeah, I mean, everything is interconnected for sure. I mean, the fact that I stay healthy and fit and I work out actually enables me to be more successful at my job. It enables me to do what I need to do to be successful at work, which in turn, when I'm successful at work, helps me to be more balanced and emotionally stable and fit. And it's like a cycle. It's almost like this full circle, right? They reinforce each other. So it's really hard if you don't like what you do at your job, or you're miserable at your job. It's hard to fix the rest of the stuff in your life, and vice versa. You know, it's like if any one of those levers is like not working right, I make sure, like for example, I make sure that I get at least a minimum 7 hours of sleep a night. Like I'm a huge proponent that sleep is one of the biggest factors of people's health and fitness and well-being. And so if you're not getting enough sleep every night, that's going to, make it harder for you to work out. You're not going to be able to be as alert and productive at work. So all of these things sort of, I think, play into each other, and they reinforce each other. And I think that you can't ignore one part of sort of what's making you not tick right, and assume that the rest of the things are going to be able to be fixed.
Hmm.
Um, and I find for me that it took me a long time to sort of shed that fat person that I had inside, because I grew up as a child, overweight. It took me a lot of time to sort of get that thought of that I am like a fat person. That's just the way I am. I'm not going to ever escape that. I've sort of that's like constantly was in my head for like so many years. And I think what really changed the equation for me is I was letting all of these things control me. I was letting food control me. Now I control the food. I control my time. I control my activity. All of these things I am in control. And just being in control of all those things, I think, has really changed that equation and changed that mental, that little fat person on my shoulder that was always, speaking in my ear and telling me, you can't do it. You're, we were born this way. This is, how you were genetically made. I have a brother who is, we're like 3.5 years, I think, in age apart. And he had a totally different, like, uh, experience than I did growing up. So I was more the arts person. I was in chorus, and I dabbled a little bit in soccer when I was younger, but I really gravitated more towards the creative pursuits. And my brother was the athlete. Like he was in soccer and football and cross country and track and all of these things. And I used to be convinced that somehow he got the athletic gene, and it skipped me. I didn't get it. And I used to use that as an excuse for why I was overweight. Well, he got the athletic gene, and I got the creative gene, and I'm never going to be that person that can be in shape, because it just wasn't meant to be. And I think now I have a completely different mindset. I could be whoever I want to be. I can be that, that athlete, and that you know my brother didn't get the lion's share of the genetic. He didn't get like some genetic jackpot, won the lottery or something that enabled him to be that way. He just enjoyed sports, and so he did it. So I found things that I enjoy, that make it keep me active. I'm not obviously competitive, athlete. I'm not doing football and things like that, but I walk my dog, and I bowl, and I work out, and I do all of these other things that keep me active. And I think it took me a long time, but after almost 50 years, that fat person that's in my that used to be in my on my shoulder in my head doesn't talk to me anymore. That person is completely gone.
Yeah, I do feel a lot of people honestly hold themselves back with the whole genetic excuse. And oftentimes it's an easy form of escape. Because like as Robert Kawasaki, I actually got this from him in one of his podcasts, is um, like people often use excuses as a form of escape because it's easy. Because when you kind of mention an excuse to yourself, it kind of shuts your mind down right away from creating a solution to a problem, which might actually be a tough thing to do, but oftentimes it just needs to be done. And maybe sometimes it needs to be done with the help of a mentor, to help fast track and speed up your process. But it needs to be done nonetheless. And I think a lot of people would benefit if, like, whenever they hear an excuse in their mind, ask themselves, like, what am I trying to escape from by using this excuse? And if you honestly answer, you'll probably get a good solution that you would need to investigate further for the specific problem. But
I'm glad you mentioned something I think which is really really important too that I sort of neglected to say. I didn't do all of this on my own either. So everybody, we're all human. We all get off track. We lose our way every once in a while, and we need some help. We need some assistance. And so I think I'm sorry I cheated on you, Eugene, but I think I've had since you, I've had one, two, probably about 4 or 5 different trainers in and out since then. Not on a constant basis, but I found that whenever I would start to get demotivated or I start to lose my way, and I just need a little kick in the ass and just like need to get back on track. I would get a trainer, and it would help me to sort of a find the motivation and the inspiration to sort of like re-energize myself and get back to that healthy lifestyle and sort of that routine. um, Especially after COVID, that was really really important because I mean, as we all know, like COVID was like really took a toll on a lot of people. I think I had COVID like the first week before everything shut down. I was like an early adopter and I had COVID before everyone else. But that,
you're like, I'll
staying at
give this a
home.
try and I'll let you guys know how it
Oh
is.
yeah,
You know,
I didn't even know what it was at the time, but
you're
it
like, I
was
thought I was
just
just
like
sick.
it wiped me out for a month. But when you're sick for a month and then you're eating at home and you're not working, and I was like, you know, I'm like, well, it's noon, I might as well have a glass of wine. I'm like, don't have a meeting, I might as well have a glass of wine at noon. Nobody's watching me, I can do this. So I found that like after COVID, especially, I needed a little kick in the ass and get back to like sort of living healthy again. But the other thing that I really love about having all of these different trainers that I've had in my life is every single trainer is a little bit different. They all have their own approach. They all have their own way of doing things and sort of um, different exercises, different philosophies. And I always learn something great, more than just something, many things great from each trainer that I've worked with, different techniques, different things. I think the first time I ever used a hex bar was with you.
Hmm.
And I love doing the hex bar now. I think that's like the most amazing apparatus to do deadlifts and things. But each trainer I think I worked with, I've learned something new, and then when I go and because inevitably I stop. I don't use a personal trainer for in perpetuity.
You're not on the Paris Hilton coaching plan, you know.
No, not forever like that.
Yeah.
I usually do it for like like say 3 months to 6 months max, right? I think I was with you for maybe 6 to 8 months, something like that. But I think 3 to 6 months, and then I go back to I take what I've learned. I use that momentum because you also what's important is like the inertia, right? Like you get into this situation where inertia just settles in, and if you ever like it's worse when you come back from a vacation. Like that's the worst, right? Like you're on vacation for like 2 weeks. I'll go to like Europe for 2 weeks, and then you haven't been working out for 2 weeks. You've been eating everything you've wanted in sight for 2 weeks, and then you get back home, and then you're back to like real life. It's really hard to get that, break that inertia and get started again. And I find that it was the same thing whenever I've had that inertia set in before. I've needed a trainer to sort of help me break it and then get the sort of momentum going again so that I could then take over on my own once I've built up that momentum. That's really helped a lot.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. I'm curious, have you ever been confused by the labels in the grocery store? In Yevgeny's book, he demystifies the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. He also covers how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and other related topics. It's a beautifully illustrated, non-technical read that comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning materials. Jump on Amazon and check out the book titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Eugene Trufkin. Now let's dive back into the podcast.
Yeah, I always tell people like, look, man, if you're kind of like stuck in a plateau or like just not making the progress you're looking to make in literally anything, including like any fitness journeys, like you just have two options. You either become like your own mechanic and you spend a lot of time studying the material and applying it yourself, doing a lot of A/B and testing and see what works for you. And inevitably, if you take that route, you're going to hire a mentor anyways if you're really interested in the subject, because you're going to need that kind of wisdom and experience that you can't quite find in books that really kind of help you excel the process. Or the other option is like you literally have to hire the mentor, and hopefully you hire the right one. And that's what's going to help you break through the plateau, because outside of that, you can't, as the saying goes, you can't solve a problem with the same belief system that led to that very same problem. And oftentimes it takes like a third party or someone with a different perspective looking from the outside in to really help you come up with a solution. But if you don't do either of those two things, like literally expect no change, because you'll keep doing what inevitably you're doing that's leading you to the results you don't want to have anyways. So
I firmly believe that this is this is my journey. Like my journey is going to be on this path for the remainder of my life. Um, it's been 12 years and I've managed to stay on track. So I feel like I figured it out, and I'm going to continue to be um, on this journey and maintain. But for me, I wanted to emphasize that it's not only about the aesthetics. Like obviously I like looking good, and I love fashion, so I love fitting into, fashionable clothes, and I like how I look when I, go out and things like that. So part of it, of course, is aesthetic. I mean, we can't escape that. We all want to look good. But I also, now that I'm 50, I've had a lot of health issues in my family that I sort of have to keep in mind. My mother had cancer. She died of cancer from multiple forms of cancer. Eventually got her, but she had stomach cancer, breast cancer. On my dad's side, he had heart disease, diabetes, eventually, passed away of an aneurysm. So like on both sides, I'm completely screwed, or I thought I was completely screwed, because I'm like, okay, is it going to be cancer, or is it going to be heart disease and diabetes? Like what is it? What's going to be my downfall? But again, it goes back to what I was saying before about I am in control of that. It doesn't have to be inevitable. I don't have to sit here and be like, well, my dad died of heart disease, so I guess that's what is in store for me. Or my mom passed away of cancer, so I guess that's what my destiny is. Um, Everything that we do is a choice.
mhm.
When I, get up in the morning, I choose to grab my dog and go for a walk for 45 minutes. When I am at work, I choose to ignore the Cinnabon smell that I have to walk past every single day because I work in a shopping center, and that damn Cinnabon smell is so delicious, and I just want to dive into a six-pack of Cinnabon and eat it in one single sitting. But I choose not to, because I know that that's not what I want for my body and not what I want for my health and fitness. And so everything that is in my life now and that is to come in the future, and how my life is going to go, is completely up to me. It's my choice. It's my decision. I'm the one that's in control of everything that happens. Nothing is inevitable. So I feel like once I figured that out, that I have a choice in everything that I do, even the most minute little things can impact your well-being. I think once I figured that out, I cracked the code that I think is gonna sustain me through the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to remember that like genetics may actually load the gun, but like you mentioned, your choices and your decisions in life pull the trigger. So just because you have a genetic tendency to express, like one gene or another, doesn't mean you're actually going to express it, unless, of course, you linger in an environment that will trigger those triggers in you. And I find also a lot of times you may have just broken through that family programming because like ideas and belief systems are passed on from one person to another. So like illness that one person may have inherited, it might just pass down to their kids as well, because they're gonna, most of the time, like what kids end up doing and how they learn from their parents is just by observing them, not necessarily like what their parents tell them. Like usually 80% of what they learn is just by watching what their parents do. So if their parents are like working 80 hours a week, totally not taking care of themselves, eating fast food, relying on a bunch of like medical drugs instead of changing the behavior that led to issue A, B, and C. They're going to see that, and they're going to see that as an acceptable form or acceptable way of approaching life's problems, or just approaching life in general. They're going to adapt that and then obviously pass it down to their kids. And it's very evident because oftentimes it's kind of like if you see a very overweight person, typically their pet is also very overweight, coincidentally. So there's that part as well. And one of my mentors, Brian Carroll, always told me when I had a back injury and I was trying to heal my back, and it was very frustrating. And I kept kind of tweaking it from time to time because I kept doing the same stuff that led to the injury inevitably. And one time he said, well, Eugene, the good thing is you're doing it to yourself, and you could also then stop doing it to yourself. So it's like, it's totally in your power, which ironically, a lot of people don't like to hear, because then that puts all the responsibility on you. And a lot of people just unfortunately aren't ready for that kind of responsibility, or more importantly, to go look in the mirror and accept that, hey, I'm just doing all this to myself. And I could stop, but I'm not stopping. And then you'd want to investigate, like, why would you do that level of self-abuse? Like what's going on here, and et cetera, et cetera. But you mentioned, well, actually touching on this subject, I find, I find this super common with males or just whoever in general. You run into males like over 40, they're like pre-diabetic or diabetic, and they're on like 2 or 3 different pharmaceutical drugs. They're not looking good. They've normalized pathology. And you generally ask them, like, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm doing all right. And it's kind of very hard, I feel, to, I guess, get them to realize that there's a better life out there. You know what I mean? uh, Going back and running into your old self, when you're like 30 pounds overweight, let's say, even before coming in and coaching with me, like, how would you feel you would talk your old self into kind of speeding up the process and realizing that, like, hey, if I just took better care of my mental and physical health, like the quality of my life would improve tremendously. Like, would it solve every problem? No, but the quality of your life will improve tremendously regardless. I know that's a tough question because
Yes.
oftentimes a person needs to have a lot of pain in their life to eventually go like, okay, enough is enough, man. But it would be
Yeah.
great if they didn't have to just have that pain. And it's kind of frustrating sometimes for health providers to like, dude, you're a mess. Like, realize it now and change it now.
I think that is the hard part, because a lot of times it takes some sort of catalyst, some sort of like crisis that people have to go through before they sort of see the light and make a change. I mean, that happened to my dad. My dad was really, really in a poor health situation. Particularly after my mom passed away, I think he was taking a lot of drugs, diabetic drugs, and heart disease drugs, and all of this. And he was living by himself. We got my brother and I got him a dog, so at least he would be more active, and he would sort of like, we convinced him to get a dog. Like we needed to get him out of the house and like have something to like put his energy into and to like take care of, and force him to walk every day and give him a reason, a purpose to sort of like get up in the morning and like do things, and we encouraged him to join some activities. He joined a barbershop chorus down in Florida, and then he started volunteering for a couple of different organizations. And so it's sad that it takes this sort of a crisis to like get you to sort of wake up and like be like, oh, there's an alternative way that I could be living my life that would make me more fulfilled and feel better about myself. That's what happened with me. When I moved to California, and I was like in my lowest point, and had gone through a very toxic relationship, and was feeling really sorry for myself, and just had no confidence. And I guess just learning from other people, and just sort of what other people have been through, and realizing that you don't necessarily need to go through a crisis or have a huge change in your life to make those changes. Like you can do it without that sort of catastrophic moment. I think what's also important is surrounding yourself with people who support you and believe in you. I've had people in my life who were like, oh, hey, don't worry about that. Like, just go ahead and, do it. Like, we only live once. Like, don't worry. Like when I would say something like, oh, I was feeling guilty about, sort of falling off the rails a little bit, and not working out, or eating unhealthy, rather than having a friend who'd be like, you know what, it's okay, start again tomorrow, like you're good, like it was just a momentary lapse, like just get back on that horse and you'll be fine, versus a friend who had said, why do you care about that, you look great, like don't, like why are you beating yourself up about that, like just do what you want, you only live once, like don't, like why do you care? And a lot of it I found that was coming from a little bit of jealousy that I was being successful, and they wanted to pull me down to where they
Hmm.
were so that they could feel better about themselves, so maybe they weren't having such a success in what they were doing, and so they wanted me to feel like it was okay for me to not be successful, join me in being unsuccessful,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Exactly.
so I had to change. I had to sort of like weed some of those naysayers out of my life a little bit, um, surround myself with people who were more supportive and understood that I was doing this for myself, but I needed people who were there that also weren't going to be a negative force to sort of like be a barrier to achieving what I wanted to achieve as well.
Yeah, and I think that's super powerful. That rule of like the five people you keep in touch with most often, you're kind of like the average of those five people and all their character traits is super powerful. And I feel that is one of the things that keeps people in their kind of cycle of complacency and cognitive dissonance, that like, hey, I look terrible, I feel terrible, but it's okay because it's somehow normal. And I feel that's also present a lot in work environments, because oftentimes you're spending way more time at work than you are even with your loved ones. Maybe not now because a lot of people are working from home, but let's say pre-COVID, definitely spending, 8, 10 hours at the office or wherever you're working. And you're surrounded most often by just very uh, unhealthy people. And I could easily prove this. There's a prevalence of metabolic health study on PubMed.gov that showed 9 out of 10 American adults now are metabolically unhealthy. And half of them are either full on type 2 diabetic or pre diabetic, like almost type 2 diabetic. So, I mean, just a lot of times people, even the ones that I find they say they're healthy, it's just they're healthy simply because they lowered their standards so much to be able to pass the test. It's like, okay, my heart is beating, I'm able to show up to work, although it takes me like maximum dose of like Xanax, 5 cups of coffee, and a Red Bull just to get up and have enough energy to wash my dishes in the morning. And that's like healthy for most people, or acceptable. But I find that is one thing that keeps people in that cycle of just not putting their mental and physical health as a top priority, especially in a lot of work environments. You still have this, I mean, it's changing a little bit, but you still have this underlining theme of like, if you're not dying for your job, you're not doing your job, you know? I don't know if you experience a lot in that, in your kind of
Y-
field, that kind of vibe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the work part of it because that also is integral in my fitness in a couple of major ways, right? I since I think what is it now 4 or 5 years ago, I have a job that requires me to walk a lot. I mean, I opened Hudson Yards, the shopping center of Hudson Yards. That was about 1 million square feet. Now, at American Dream, I've been working at American Dream now for 6 months. It's a 3 million square foot shopping center. So, like on a Saturday, when I work on Saturdays and I'm manager on duty on Saturdays, I probably cover and do about in an average Saturday anywhere from 25,000 to 30,000 steps on a typical Saturday because I'm just going back and forth, checking on things, checking on the tenants, walking back and forth, putting out fires, whatever, helping guests. So I could choose to have a job where I just sit at a desk all day long. I mean, I have a lot of qualifications in my background that I could definitely do that kind of job, no problem. I choose to have a position that requires me to be active and requires me to walk because I want that to be sort of ingrained in my
Hmm.
everyday lifestyle. So that way, when I have my walk in the morning with my dog and my walk at night, and then I'm doing all this activity during the day that I'm forced to do just because it's part of my job, it just makes it easy to stay in shape. Like it makes it easy
Hmm.
to not have to think about, then I don't have to schedule an extra time to go on the treadmill for 30 minutes or, extra time to go on the bike for 30 minutes. Cause these are just it's part of my daily existence. So I think one of my recommendations for people is like, if you feel unhealthy in your lifestyle, don't just look at what you're doing outside of work. Look at what you're doing at work. Like, do you
Hmm.
have a job that is sort of contributing to a poor lifestyle? Part of it also, before I got these last jobs I've had in the last 5 years, I was traveling all the time for my job. So I had a job that took me probably out of New York 3 weeks out of the month, and when you're traveling 3 weeks out of the month, you're not eating well because you're eating at hotels. You're like, oh, well, the company's paying for it. I might as well just have like the steak with the dessert and everything, and 2 glasses of wine because it's not my money, and so I want to like milk it for all it's worth. Uh, it's hard to work out when you're traveling. It's
Hmm.
really hard to like maintain a healthy like exercise schedule when you're on the road. Just the time, and you're on planes and hotels, and not all hotels even have fitness facilities. So, and that I was just like on the go, and it was never stable. I never felt like I was grounded. I didn't have a life really in New York City either. Didn't have any extracurricular activities outside of work because I just didn't have the time. I was traveling all the time. So that was another example of where my work choice, because I chose to be that regional director that would travel around all the time. That choice in work had a direct impact on my ability to maintain a healthy fitness lifestyle. So now I have a job where I don't travel. I miss being Diamond Medallion and Delta. Don't get me wrong. I really, really enjoyed that. But for my lifestyle, it's much better. It's for my health, it's much better. Um, and I have a job where I'm constantly on the move. I'm constantly on the go. Yeah, there are moments where I have to sit down and be at a computer and do some work. And I understand there's a lot of people that are like that. But you can make little changes in your daily routine that will help you to work out and be active without even thinking about it. Like, for example, I will sometimes, instead of having a video conference meeting, which by the way, people will do video conference meetings when they're literally in the next room from me. They'll be like, "Hey, let's get on a video conference." I'm like, "What do you mean? You're like right next
That's
to me. Why do
that sounds
why
like
do we need
something
to
I would do.
like what?" Yeah. So
I'm like here
sometimes I'll
texting
be
back and
like,
forth with my girlfriend, and she's like in the next room.
I'm like, "Why do we need the video conference? We're right here." But what I would say to them is like, "Why don't we go take a walk?" let's have a walking meeting. So instead of being on a video conference for 30 minutes, now we're walking and talking and going through the center, and having that meeting, but we're doing it while we're on the move and while we're walking, and getting some steps in, you know? So even if you're in a job where you're sitting down all the time or having video conferences, there's little things that you can do, little changes that you can make that will just sort of help you to be more active without even really that much effort.
Yeah, I feel you touched on another important topic here, and that's when a lot of people are deciding on, what kind of occupation they're getting into, or if they should go on to that next promotion with inevitably a lot more responsibilities or something of that sort. They always kind of look at like what kind of monetary upgrade they would get, but they never really calculate the cost of making that money oftentimes, because inevitably you're going to have to sacrifice a decent amount to work like 10 more hours. And if you're already working, let's say 45 hours a week, now you're up to 55 hours a week, which is quite a big difference because now you literally almost have no days off, especially if like you got to spend one of your days off, which is typically Sunday, getting ready for the new week to make sure all the paperwork is in place, all the employees are set on their tasks, et cetera, et cetera. And I find, especially with certain clients in the past, I notice, let's say they're in one position, let's say, I don't even know the ranking system of corporate offices, but let's say they're just like a normal manager, and they're already having a lot of time, a tough time keeping up with the tasks. And they tell me they feel like anxious, drained. They're sleeping like 4 hours a day because their mind is racing so much at night. They can't even get to sleep until like 2 a.m. or something. And then they got to be up at 5 and at work at 7 a.m. And, we get them into shape, and we work on a lot of lifestyle variables, but then, a year or two goes by and they're like, well, a promotion came up at work, you know? And it's like they couldn't even handle like 45 hours anymore, but now this promotion requires them to work like 60 hours, but then they see like, oh, I'm making like 30, 40, 50 more thousand a year or more sometimes.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm going to take it, but trust me, I'm going to maintain everything and I'm going to make it work. And sure enough, they come back like 3 or 4 years later, just as overweight. And they're like, and I'm like, dude, I told you, like at the end of the day, you're just one human being with one central nervous system that could only handle so many micro stresses in your week. After a certain, and everything varies a little bit from person to person, but most people, I would say 99% of people, it's not a good idea for them to be working like 50 plus hours a week. Most definitely. There are some outliers for sure, especially if the work is very closely aligned to their core values and life mission,
Mm.
then you can push a bit more hours and kind of do well. But when you combine, especially with a lot of people, they just don't like their work, but now they're working a lot of hours, it makes the stress exponentially worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Like if you're doing something you love and you're passionate about, and that pushes you to put in a lot of hours, great. But if you're doing something you hate that stresses you out and gives you a lot of anxiety, and then now you're doing it 50 to 60 hours a week, then that's a problem. You know, I've
Yeah.
been very fortunate, and I understand not everybody is in this situation, but I've been very fortunate where I've worked for bosses who understand that having a proper work-life balance is really crucial to being successful and effective at work, right? So yes, there is the occasional time where I'll have to work on a day off, or I'll have to attend a meeting, on one of my days off. But for the most part, I'm pretty, and here again, it goes back to, control again. So like, you have to sort of manage your boss in a way. You have to sort of manage up and be like, listen, if you want me to be effective and you want me to be successful, I need to have five days of work and 2 days off. Like this is the norm that I expect. If you need me to put a little extra work in from time to time, I will do whatever is required. But the general expectation is I need to have a work-life balance, to do other things outside of work, to sing in. I sing in, New York City Gay Men's Chorus. I do, bowling on Sundays. There's other things I need to do outside of work to maintain an emotional balance, to maintain a healthy spiritual balance, you name it, right? And if you're dedicating all of your life to work, and that's coming at the expense of everything else, then there's nothing left in the bank to give. There's nothing left
Mhm.
that don't have any extra capital to spend on improving yourself, or leading a healthy lifestyle. So I am pretty lucky because I'm pretty honest and open with my boss and being like, he'll be like, hey, we're doing this thing, and I was like, well, that's my day off, so why don't you ask so and so to step in for me? He's working that day, So you have to sort of be, bold enough and courageous enough to sort of, um, you know, make that decision and sort of manage your boss in that way. I'm lucky, I guess, because I have a boss who responds well to that. But I think there's more people than realize that could probably do that. That could be a little bit more firm in managing their own work and not just let the work manage them.
Yeah, and I find that is one challenging thing in terms of people having the confidence to set those healthy boundaries at work. And I find just a lot of people just don't have that confidence. Do you have like any tips of how to kind of approach management or your boss if, well, I mean, the first thing is definitely identify what you need to be healthy before
Yeah.
approaching them with demands and be very crystal clear about that with yourself. But do you have any tips? Because a lot of people are like, well, shit, if I bring this up, they're going to fire me and get some young guy to that's going to work for like 30% less pay and like way more hours because he doesn't even know any different, but he'll find out in 5 years when he ends up in my exact
Yeah.
situation that it's not healthy to do that.
So we're definitely treading into a different territory when it comes to talking about sort of how to be successful at work versus how to be successful at a healthy lifestyle. But again, I think that the two are they're linked, they're interwoven. For me, um, one of the biggest things I tell people, because I started out, my journey. I started out at Louis Vuitton as a sales associate, and then I worked my way up. And in 10 years, I was training director for the entire company, right? And now I'm VP of guest experience for the third largest shopping center in North America, right? So at 50, I'm a VP, which has sort of always been my goal. Um, the biggest thing I think that has helped me in my career is that I've learned is um, accept own your mistakes. Like when you make a mistake, when you make a failure, own it and draw attention to it. Be like, listen, I effed up. I take ownership for it, but this is what I'm going to do to fix it. This is what I'm going to do differently. But by the same token, and this is what people fail to do, is when you do something great and when you're successful at something, when you make an accomplishment, tell everybody that will listen to you at work, especially your bosses, about what you did, right? Because nobody's going to do that for you. Nobody's going to say like, hey, look at what Brian did. He did something great. And he was successful at this. He raised the review percentage, online review percentage, 5 percentage points this month. I used to be like, oh, I can't do that. I'm
Kind
it's
of,
being conceited if you talk about your successes, and you don't want to rub people the wrong way by talking about what you did that was good. Screw that. Like anytime I do something great, I'll tell my boss and my boss's boss and anybody who will listen, hey, guess what, we improved this from this to this because of this and this and this that I implemented. And that's the kind of thing that will prove your worth, that shows the value of their investment in you. So if they invested you and brought you on for a position and they don't see anything happening and you don't tell them that anything's happening, then they start to wonder, oh, did I make a mistake in bringing this person on? Doesn't seem like anything is happening. Doesn't seem like any improvement is going on. So one of the biggest things that I've learned is don't be shy about sharing what you did. I give reports all the time. I'll send like an email to my boss and be like, okay, this is what I've accomplished this week. I've done this and this and this and this. This is what's on the agenda for next week. And oh, by the way, 6 months from now, we're going to be here.
mhm.
And because I've been able to figure that out, my bosses trust me. They know that I'm there also to make them look good, which I think is important. And in turn, my boss then has my back. Like he's protected me when certain things have happened. Like he sort of stepped in. He's like, I got you. I got your back. So that sort of symbiotic relationship develops when you let your boss know what value you bring to hit the relationship with him and the relationship, him or her, and the relationship to the organization.
Yeah, and I feel you brought up an important point, and a lot of people kind of are thrown off sometimes when I tell them this, but I always tell them like, if you want anything to last long term, whether it's a relationship or a job, you inevitably have to be selfish. As weird as that sounds, because of course you got to identify, like what your true core values are and be crystal clear about that. But you want to make sure when you get in relationships and when you get into occupations that those areas reflect those core values. If you want if you want to be successful in those areas long term, of course you can stay in those areas nonetheless and kind of reach success, quote unquote, but you'll be extremely miserable in the process. And you see a lot of people, they reach a certain title that's not really aligned with who they are. And they're just like, super overweight, super unhealthy, super miserable, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always important to have your needs met first. Because like you mentioned, you could only give as much as you have, So if you constantly not having your needs met and you're giving and giving and giving, you're just not going to have enough love and enough energy to be able to contribute to that project. And inevitably, what ends up happening at that point is you kind of grow disgruntled towards your coworkers, your employers, your partner, whatever. And then there's bickering that happens. Let's say, you're not having your needs met, and all of a sudden your coworker didn't get their part of the project done. Now you have to stay there, although you already don't want to stay there and finish that project. Then you get mad at the employee. Then you guys start arguing, or there's some kind of like tension there, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty clear, but it leads to a lot of unhealthy patterns. And just generally, the central nervous system hasn't evolved to deal well with chronic micro stresses, especially when they're very abundant in a person's week. And a lot of these little details that people constantly overlook lead to those chronic micro stresses every single minute of every day. So no wonder, people typically feel overwhelmed, very anxious, very tired all the time, because it's draining on the body to have to deal with that all the time. And then like, how the heck are you going to keep up with your workouts, be motivated enough to eat well or sleep well? It all has like an interconnected trickle down effect on literally like everything. So it's important to always, like I mentioned, just master the basics and you'll be good to go. Like my grandma that I always say that raised me on an off-grid farm in Ukraine, she never even went to the hospital, and she lived to be 87 years in perfect health, just by mastering the basics. She was outside all day. She moved around all day like you. She ate like natural, like organic food, obviously. And she was in bed on time. And it's
Yeah.
oftentimes, it's like, I feel like, especially the Western world, they like complexity. They're like, there's no way Brian could be so healthy and still have youthful looking skin at 50 without doing like 1,000,005 biohacking secrets. It's like, no, man, I just go to sleep on time. I manage my
Yeah.
central nervous system. I drink a lot of water. I have like a um, uh, healthy relationship in the sense that my environment reflects what I want in my life, et cetera, et cetera. And I take responsibility for when things aren't going my way. Because sometimes, even like, for example, I find with a lot of people, let's say they get in a car accident, they had a back injury, that may have not been their fault, but what keeps them in pain is oftentimes their fault. They don't see the right practitioners, they don't do the physical therapy correctly. They might not lose the extra 20 pounds that are offering, that are including, that are basically imposing a lot of compressive penalties on the back, et cetera, et cetera. They're like, oh, it's because of the car accident. I'm like, no, man, you're keeping yourself in pain. And that's okay. Because once again, like I said, if you're doing it to yourself, you can stop doing it to yourself. And if you don't know how to do that, that's totally okay too. Just find someone that does and help fast track the process for you. So, um, well, Brian, are there any other tips or any other topics you want to touch on?
No, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway I think I want people to know is that there's nothing special about me. I mean, I'm not. There's nothing. There's no secret that that I have kept that I has made me somehow unique, like a unicorn. That explains why I've been able to maintain the healthy lifestyle. I've just learned through trial and error that I have the power and the control at every moment of the day to make the right decisions, and that I don't let other influences, other things outside control me. I don't let food control me. I don't let, traffic on the highway control me. I don't let my job stresses control me. I'm the one that's in control, and I make those decisions every day that either will set me on the right healthy path or don't, right? And so as long as I keep making those right decisions and set up my environment around me to enable me to make those right decisions, there's no reason why I can't continue to live. Well, we'll talk in 10 years, Eugene. How about that?
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll still have this flawless skin.
Probably look 5 years younger. Probably look 5 years younger in 10 years. Well, really quick, Brian, hypothetical question. Let's say you're coming back from Hawaii. You're now living in California. This is before we even met. How would you say your life would be currently if you never went through that fitness journey? You just maintained that path of pathology that you found yourself in.
I mean, I certainly, I don't think I would be as content and happy as I am in my life right now. I mean, I am at 50 years old, like, so I was 38, people turning 50, they're like completely panicked about it. I mean, 40 was also, a major life change, but 50, it's sort of like you have this thought that, oh, shit, my life is going to be over at 50 because everything's going to be falling apart, right? So I think if I hadn't, made those changes, those life changes, permanent life changes, and those realizations, I mean, I would just be, I think, a very unhappy person. But because I've made those permanent changes, I'm in the best shape of my life at 50 years old. I'm so happy. I have the best lifestyle. I have like the greatest dog sitting over in the corner, like just chilling out. I've managed to, finally earn that VP title that I was chasing for so many years. So I mean, every part of my life has been successful. Now I am single, so that's, I'm not so successful on the relationship front, on
Well,
the
wait a
love
minute.
front, but we'll get there.
Compared to a lot of the bad relationships people are in right now, I think that is a plus to be single,
Well, I think part of that journey, and we did talk about sort of relationships and love and stuff like that, but I learned to be happy alone as well. And I think you have to be happy to love yourself enough to think I'm worth it by myself. I'm enough by myself. I don't need somebody else
Yeah.
in my life to validate being happy and being by myself. I think that also was a big factor. I'm perfectly happy and content. If I meet somebody, great. That's awesome. I welcome, I welcome a relationship if it were to happen, or a partner. But I'm also content and completely happy to be just living my life and being alone and being happy. So yeah, I mean, I don't know where I would be if I hadn't met you, Eugene. Like that was a pivotal moment. I think you were there at the right time in my life where I really needed it, where I was sort of at one of my lowest points. And that set me on the right path. And it was sort of like a huge course correction. And in that time since then, I've had little deviations where I've sort of had to get back on track, but never to the degree that I was at that point 12 years ago, where I really needed a major course correction. And so obviously, I mean, I've told you many times, I'm so grateful for that you were in my life at that moment to set me back on track. But yeah, here we are 12 years later, and I couldn't ask for honestly anything else. I'm just super content and happy in my life.
Cool. What a great story. So, yeah, and honestly, it's just good to see you again. And thanks for keeping in touch over the years as well. Like I appreciate it. It was always good chatting with you.
I know I've other trainers, Eugene, but you're always will be my favorite trainer. I promise.
Thank you. What a great way to end the weekend, Okay. Well, thank you, Brian, for being a guest. And I saw people came in and out. Good to see all of you guys as well. And thanks for jumping in. And have a good rest of the weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Eugene. Have a
Take
great
care.
weekend. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you've ever had trouble losing weight, or you've lost weight, but still didn't have the ideal body or health you're aiming for, please feel free to reach out anytime and book an assessment. Eugene will work with you to cover your goals in detail, see what's holding you back, and go from there. In the meantime, feel free to check out the countless testimonials on Eugene's website in the link below. In the testimonial section, you'll notice everyone has various backgrounds, are of all different ages, and all have had different challenges in their life, but they all have one thing in common: they were all able to find their health and achieve their ideal body. You're also welcome to add yourself to the Facebook group in the link below. There you'll have access to the live videos that Eugene does weekly on Sundays, and other helpful content. Thank you again for tuning in.